You're listening to Art Destinations, a fortnightly podcast exploring how islands shape imagination. Each season, we speak with artists and thinkers whose work is deeply connected to these distinct and contained places. Following our series set in Luchuita, Tasmania, and Venice, this season takes us to Sicily. Hello, my name is Sarah Rhodes. I'm your host and co-produce Art Destinations with Alfio Puglisi, Director of the Sicily Art Residency Programme, as part of our shared interest in understanding how defined landscapes influence creative practice. Together, we created this podcast to connect artists working on the periphery and to offer a space where ideas of place and belonging can be explored. Today, I'm in conversation with Sicilian artist Elisa Giardina Papa, one of the artists invited by curator Cecilia Alemani to exhibit in the main international exhibition of the 59th Venice Art Biennale in 2022, The Milk of Dreams. Elisa lives and works between New York and Sant'Ignazio, Sicily, and is a professor of modern culture and media at Brown University. Our conversation explores her first two works in a trilogy set in Sicily. Elisa's subjects are those that cannot easily be categorised. The work she is currently making, titled She Flickered in and Out of History, looks at the history of an island that emerged from the ocean between Tunisia and Sicily. It is a story of failed imperialism, when many nations tried to conquer it before it disappeared just 5 months later. The 2022 Biennale work, U Scantu, A Disorderly Tale, explores the rituals of women healers in Sicilian culture, alongside official archives documenting their persecution during the Spanish Inquisition. In each case, Elisa is inviting the viewer to open their minds when making sense of the world and consider alternate points of view. We will share some images of the Biennale work U Scantu, A Disorderly Tale on our Instagram page at artdestinations.podcast. Subscribe to Art Destinations on your hosting platform so you don't miss an episode, and even leave a review. Your contribution supports us. Welcome, Elisa, to Art Destinations. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, the podcast Art Destinations is really exploring the similarities and differences between the islands and how the experience of being on the periphery compared with the centre. And I do notice when I speak to people in Europe in particular, everyone's just moving all the time. And from an Australian perspective, that's very, very different because we don't really have the access to travel in such a fluid way. So I'm interested in how that impacts ideas. I think that that'll probably just come through naturally in the conversations, but the idea of the periphery and what that means is something which I find quite interesting. But in our preliminary conversation, you identified Sicily as a place that has historically been in the centre, which I think is a really interesting idea because it is positioned in the Mediterranean, just north of Africa, the bottom of Italy. It's in a really sort of strategic position. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the cultures and the significance of the location of Sicily.
For me, to say that Sicily was historically not the periphery is not about wanting to re-centralize the island, but it is rather about undoing the rhetoric of the so-called, for example, migration crisis, right? So it is about dismantling the politics of the European Union and also the current Italian far-right government imposed upon the Mediterranean. So, for example, migration is now unprecedented. It has been intrinsic to Mediterranean culture for millennia. So for centuries, Sicily was not the border separating Europe from North Africa, for example, but rather a contact zone, a space of cultural exchange, of syncretism of the diverse culture of the Mediterranean. So, for example, through the centuries, Sicily has been traversed and lived by the Greeks, the Carthaginians, the Romans, the Byzantines, the Arabs, then the Holy Roman Empire, the Normans, the French. That is, the people of this island spoke, dreamed and desired in many different languages.
So let's start with the work you're currently making, She Flickered in and Out of History, which is based on the poetic idea of an island that appeared in the Mediterranean between Tunisia and Sicily in 1831. It quickly became a contested site among the European powers, seeking to expand their empires, and then it disappears. So would you tell us a little bit about this island?
It is a tale of an island that refused to be annexed. This is how I like to think about it. So what happened is that in the 1831 there was an underwater volcanic eruption that created this new island in almost a day. There was actually a large basalt formation, quite small actually, between Tunisia and Sicily. So the Bourbon crown that was ruling Sicily at the time, Sicily was still not part of Italy, sent his custom officials who planted an oar in its ground and named it Isola Ferdinandea. Then the British Royal Navy claimed it for the United Kingdom and they named it Graham Island. The French Navy also made a landing, and the French geologist Cossin Prevost called it the Island of July. Tourists began to travel to the island, sailors began to chart it on their maps, and observers at the time even speculated whether the seismic unrest might cause the entire chain of the submarine volcanoes to emerge, and thus linking Tunisia with Sicily, so upsetting the European colonial order. In December the same year, of the 1831, only after 5 months after its emergence, the island vanished underwater. And I like to say that the island refused to be annexed. So this new video work, which is called She Flickered In and Out of History, leaps between the historical records and the speculative to reflect and meditate on the illuminatory potential of an island that refused to be conquered, refused to be annexed.
I mean, what's your process, your research process?
My work is often... always maybe research-driven. So at the moment I'm finishing actually the research phase, which is about collecting all the historical documents that are the records written by the men of science, state and kingdom who set foot on the island and described it, measured it and named it. Photography actually will be invented only a few years later, right? So we don't have any photographic record of the island. We do have descriptions and drawings, and the drawings are actually quite interesting because they're all different. So this island is basically a shapeshifter. The volcano was erupting, creating new matter, while the sea was eroding parts of this matter away. So the island, the shape and the size kept changing over those 5 months until then it completely disappeared. So to me the work is about this tension between world building and world breaking, is about making human history, and specifically, as we were saying, colonial history absurd, is about dispersion and erosion, is a question of possibility, it is about disorientation, it is about the ungovernable.
It's very about fluidity, really, as well. I mean, it's quite beautiful to think that something could change so dramatically. Like, you always think of land as something that's quite static, don't you? So I think that's really beautiful that it kind of just kept morphing over those 5 months.
Oh, it was a shapeshifter, like something that was always changing. Almost every day, or in these 5 months, it was keep changing. It was impossible to really measure it and drawing it. It was this thing that was evolving and changing for the whole time in which was above the water.
So have you dived below? I mean, have you dived under the water to be able to see the island?
I did. So this summer I actually went to Pantelleria, which is another volcanic island between Tunisia and Sicily, and I learned how to scuba dive, and then I went in search of this disappeared island. So yes, the island is still there. It is this dormant underwater volcano, so a submerged mountain of black and sand and black rock. And the peak of the island is 8-9 meters below the water surface. So it is almost at the level of the water surface, but as long as it stays underwater, it cannot be claimed. So then if in the future another volcanic eruption occurs in the same area, I think probably the international territorial dispute might start once again.
That's so interesting, isn't it? I think that's amazing. 8 or 9 meters is not very deep.
It's not deep at all. I mean, it's like 8 meters. So.
Okay. So how are you making work about that? I mean, what does it look like? Because unless you're filming underwater, what are you making? What can we see?
I mean, the film is still in the making. Again, I'm in the research phase now, but I will start to shoot in at the end of the summer and beginning of the fall in September. It will become a video installation, so a video, but also a series of sculptures made with volcanic material and glass. Regarding the video, a big part of it will be shot underwater. So it will at the end be a kind of elemental video environment that immerse the viewer into an ecosystem of unstable, submerged and resurfaced matter that is like I want the island never to be visible as a single identity, as an annexable entity. So it will remain elusive. Instead, it will be visually, but also sonically rendered as this evolving, unbounded formation of seawater ripples, pyroclastic material, volcanic ash. So something that is, as we said, is like keeps shifting and morphing and changing. And the filming will be in Pantelleria and Stromboli, which are two other Sicilian volcanic islands, and then around the submerged slopes of the actual island.
Just as a matter of interest, do you film or do you commission someone else to film for you?
I will have help. I will work with the same director of photography that I work with for Uscanta Disorderly Tale, which I presented at the Venice Biennale. In this case, I will also work with scuba diving video operator, because the camera that we will use is quite big and heavy and difficult to manage, but I will be underwater with the video operator.
No, I was just curious about that. Where will the work be shown?
So the production will probably finish hopefully in December, and the project has been granted the Italian Council for the production, and it will premiere at the Mambo, the Bogota Museum of Modern Art, and then it will be also be presented at the Madre Museum in Napoli. After that, it will travel to Berlin. After that, it will travel to London and then to Taipei.
Yeah, what a great show, a great tour. That's fantastic. The work that you made for the Art Biennale, Uscanto, A Disorderly Tale, that's really interesting work, exploring the idea of rituals in Sicily and sort of cultural histories, and you went through the archives, and it's set in Ghibellina, the town, the architectural town, the sort of postmodern town in Sicily, near Palermo. So what's the premise of this work?
The work of Uscanto Disorderly Tale is a video and ceramic installation which reimagine the Sicilian queer multi-species myth of the Donna di Fora. The Donna di Fora can be loosely translated from Sicilian as the women from the outside and beside themselves. And in the oral culture, the Donna di Fora were described as being both magical and criminal. They were said to possess both the feminine and the masculine, the human and the animal, the benevolent and the vengeful. So my work charted their mythology through two completely different archives, which then at one point violently collided to become one. So on one side we had the archive of the oral culture, so an archive that belongs to the Sicilian and Mediterranean oral culture, which I like to call as a socio-poetic or social magical unwritten archive of the multitude. And then on the other side is the archive of the Spanish Inquisition, that is in the 16th and 17th century, this immaterial heritage of the tale of the Donna di Fora was somehow like violently made real in the trials for heresy that were perpetrated in Palermo under the Spanish crown. So the tales of the Donna di Fora became an instrument of persecution for women who were politically troublesome, unruly, women that were actually punished for not being devoted to a normative or a proprietary notion of selfhood and sexuality. For example, they were queer and not married, so not protected by marriage, not protected by the church. So the work was Canto Disorderly Tale basically tried to break open the inquisitorial archive to conjure, to reactivate the radical imagination of the women who were believed and also believed themselves to be Donna di Fora.
What was happening to these women?
They were put to death or like to prison.
So they were identified as outsiders. Their stories were recorded.
Yeah, it was like an inquisitorial trial, right? So they were actually identified as witches. But that is something that was brought by the Spanish crown as a kind of like epistemological framework. So the tale of the Donna di Fora, most of these women were actually healers, didn't understand themselves as witches. They understood themselves as healers. But then somehow the technology of the Inquisition like created this kind of like, framework to punish these women within the idea of the witch and the evil and the Catholic Church and all that.
So when they were being interviewed, were they being interviewed about their healing practices?
Healing practices and also rituals, like night rituals. It was not really an interview, right? At least the documents that we have, they're written by the notary of what are called the notary of the secret. The secret was the Spanish Inquisition, which they called the secret. So actually, so we have the names, we have the dates, we have data, information on how long they spent. Like for example, in prison, we know like the people that were killed by the Inquisition. But in terms of like really knowing the way in which these women describe themselves, that is something that somehow is lost in the archive because those documents were written by the Inquisition.
So are the people still practicing like that now? Like how were you unearthing the essence or the truth of who these women were?
I don't think that is possible. And that's why it's called a disorderly tale. And also somehow like in the figure of the Donna di Fora, I'm putting together two Sicilian figures. One is quite mythological, that is the Donna di Fora, and also you have the Mare, and the Mare were the healers. And the tradition of the Mare, which are like healers, is still active in Sicily.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it is.
How is it practiced?
With like one of like the ritual that I found in the Inquisitorial archive, but also I found in a book by De Martino, which is a book of the 60s, which is called 50s, I believe, which is called I'm translating from Italian, South and Magic. Is actually recording in the south of Italy some of these rituals that were still happening in the 50s and 60s. And most of them are like similar to the one that I found in the archive of the Inquisition. One of these rituals is the cutting of the scantu, which is also the name of the film. And the scantu, again, translated from Sicilian, is the fear of living. So they would do a ritual with ropes, which is also like a kind of it's part of the visual of the film. Basically tying up these women and then cutting the rope as a way to get rid of the scantu, get rid of the fear of living.
Okay. So you set the work in Ghibellina. Why did you? Can you describe the town? Actually, would be a really nice opportunity for the listeners to hear a little bit about Ghibellina, and then we could talk about why you used the town and how it was portrayed in the film.
Gibellina Nuova is a small city in the hinterlands of Sicily. It's about 1 hour from Palermo, like driving towards the south of the island. And Gibellina, the old Gibellina, so the old city, was completely destroyed by the Belice earthquake in the 1968. And then, so this new city, Nuova Gibellina, was rebuilt about 7 kilometers from the old one, and it was rebuilt as a utopian postmodern city. A utopian postmodern city which is today almost abandoned by its community.
First of all, what is a postmodern city?
So it is a planned city. It's a planet like where nothing was there, and they planned the city and the style, since we're like in the Belice earthquake was like 68, but then they start to build in the 70s, late 70s, so the architectural style is postmodern.
Okay, and why has it been abandoned by its people?
Because it's probably not so easy to live in a utopian planned city.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? You can't control things. You have to let things happen organically.
Yeah, that I think is a story of a lot of this experiment with architecture of planned city, right? I'm not sure you can plan a whole city and then have the community create attachment to it, really. And so that's also why for me it was interesting to work with the city of Gibellina, to work with it as this kind of like backdrop or like set for the film, because to me there is a sense of failed promise. And so there is this strange tension between hope and defeat. And maybe hope and defeat was also the kind of like affect and emotion that I had while I was trying to reactivate the stories and the tale of the Donna di Fora through the archive of the Inquisition.
For anybody who didn't get to go to the Biennale, didn't get to see the exhibition, how did you convey these ideas?
So as I was saying, like it is like a video installation. So there is a part that is like a video. It's like a short video, actually. It's like 12 minutes. And then, but also all around the videos, there are like a series of ceramic sculptures. So also the ceramic sculpture, the shape of the ceramic sculptures are coming from the symbolism of the Donna di Fora that I found in the archive. And in terms of the film is divided in 3 chapters. The first chapter is a contemporary reimagination of the Donna di Fora as this like group of teenagers that are biking with these bike tuning bikes through the abandoned architecture of Gibellina. The bike tuning is kind of like street culture phenomenon that started in Palermo some years ago, in which these teenagers are modifying the bikes by building on top of the bikes, like constructing the bike with this super powerful sound system. And then from the kind of like outskirts of the city, they go to the center and they just play this like really like loud techno, hip hop, or neo-melodic music. So that is like a reference to like a cultural phenomenon, like a young cultural phenomenon that is happening in Palermo. And this is how I reimagine the Donna di Fora as this like group of teenagers that are riding with these really loud bikes all around the abandoned architecture of Gibellina.
I love that. I love the stereo on the bike. I think that's visually really, it's pretty cool. Alfio was talking to me yesterday about the goat. What's the symbolism of the goat in your work?
The symbolism of the goat is also coming from the archive of the Donna di Fora. So and also something like I want to clarify is that is also why I'm calling this a disorderly tale, because again, like I used the archive of the Inquisition, but I also used the tales of the oral culture. For example, some of these tales were like told to me by my grandmother. And one of these tales, for example, that is recounted over and over again of the Donna di Fora is how a Donna di metaphora would appear as this beautiful woman, but then at one point, let's say the skirt, will move, and then you will discover that she had like a goat feet. And so like the goat is something that has been like somehow connected with this imaginary, and so that's why I decided then to work actually with a goat that we brought in this Baroque palace in Catania, Palazzo Biscari, which is a palace that was built around the time of the Inquisition. So the last scene of the film, it is about this goat that is walking, moving around this Baroque palace in the center of Catania.
And the symbolism of the goat, he was talking about it having an agricultural element of it being like a mainstay of shepherd, like a shepherd or a farmer would keep their goat, but also the wiliness of the goat, the kind of not sneaky, but that it's pushing the boundaries. Did behavioral traits of the goat, how did that relate to what you were trying to say?
I mean, the goat is like many symbols, there is so many symbols like connected to the goat. For example, the goat is also the symbol of tragedy in like ancient Greece. And at the same time, it's like a common animal all around Sicily. My aunt has a goat. And I grew up with like at least one goat around me, like all the time. Actually, I wanted to use the goat of my aunt to shoot the film, but then it was like too complicated to travel with the goat from like where I'm from, that is this village in Messina, and to reach Catania with the goat in the car, of course. So then we decided to work with a goat that was living closer to the city of Catania.
In both of these works, you're exploring the idea of the outsider, with the volcano she flickered in and out, that disappeared, that's on there sort of the edge, that was highly prized, but then sort of escaped imperialism. And then the disorderly tale, where there's these vulnerable women who were, imprisoned for their beliefs, essentially. But you found yourself really in the center, like as a professor at Brown University, living in New York City. You've come from a place that, I guess a lot of people do leave Sicily, as what I've been finding. It seems to be that you're interested in the kind of the margins. Would you say this was true?
The margins. For sure, I'm interested in what I've been calling like lately as incomputability or uncomputability, so that which cannot be easily computed, which cannot be easily categorized or named. And both the tale of the Donna di Fora and also this island have this aspect to it, right? So that which keeps flickering in and out of any possible definition. So I don't know if it is the margin, but it is about what stays ungraspable, what cannot be made fully transparent or legible.
Okay. Yeah, what can't be defined. With a disorderly tale as well, there was an effort to define or, classify these people as not fit for society, with witches. Would you say that fitted with the same lens, that they couldn't be defined, or maybe they were too easily defined? I'm not sure.
Both, right? They were too easily defined by the Inquisition. So somehow the Inquisition flattened down a mythology that was much more complex than the witch.
Now, I want to just shimmy a little bit to your childhood, because I always think that's really interesting. What was it like growing up in Sicily? What was the atmosphere? And do you feel like there's a shared atmosphere with the work that you're making now?
Maybe, it's difficult to. Yes. There must be a reason why. Specifically, since I moved to the United States, I'm drawn back to Sicily, and my art is always thinking about Sicily and in general Mediterranean culture. And like I feel the two things that to me are like really specific about Sicily is on one side that is ungrounded, so it is a land that is always shaking. And that is not even like, it's not a conceptual layer, it is always shaking, because we constantly have earthquakes, we have volcanic eruption, we have 3 active volcanoes in Sicily, even, I guess, more than 3 if you also consider the one that are underwater, which is this like constant reminder that the ground is actually not static. Right? So then this is something that I've been thinking, like, of course, more not when I was a child, more now. There is this kind of like impossibility to ground your thinking in Sicily, right? It's like you kind of have like to think in a way that's synchronized with the land that is always moving and shaking. So this is one aspect I feel is like specific of Sicily. The other one is what I mentioned like at the beginning, that is its layered history, right? So Sicily historically is a space of cultural contamination, shifting borders, and also vexing and imaginative adaptation to the many colonization, wars, migration, culture, and economic crisis that we have witnessed. The language itself, the Sicilian, which is a dialect or maybe a language, carries the traces of this history, right? By retaining words from Arabic, Greek, Latin, French, Spanish, and more. And also, but now also carries the stigma of subalternity. So you learn Sicilian from your mother or your grandmother, but you can never use it to speak or write in school.
Really?
You will be understood as illiterate.
Really?
Yeah.
It's an oral language and you can't use it, in a business or education context.
No, it is a language of the street. It is a language that you speak at home, but it's not a language that you use in school.
If you couldn't speak Sicilian and you lived in Sicily, you wouldn't feel like you truly belonged?
If you didn't speak Sicilian in Sicily, no. I mean, and it's also something that like little by little is a little bit lost. The younger generation speaks Sicilian less. For example, my grandmother, she would just speak Sicilian, not Italian at all. The new generation, they don't, not necessarily. So no, you can live in Sicily, you can be Sicilian without speaking the Sicilian, but somehow it's the language of the community. It's the language that I would use to make a joke. Like there is an intimacy in that language that I feel is like really strong.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. We have, the First Nations people in Australia have oral languages and not written language, although it's become written now since, the British Empire moved in. But I listened to this podcast recently called The Knowledge Gene, and it was about how people can learn how to improve their memory based on oral cultures, because oral cultures are passing stories down from generations to generations, and they're not changing these stories, they're staying the same. So how can you pass these stories down through an oral tradition? They're kind of creating song, or they're creating a way of moving through the landscape and attaching stories to the landscape as a way of remembering the traditions of that place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually my grandmother, which is also the person who told me some of these tales of the Donna di Fora, was part of the oral tradition. Like the kind of like story that in tales that she will recount were not just stories. I mean, they had like specific structures, and some of them were songs with rhymes. So they would always kind of like be the same. It was oral culture. It was not about telling a story. It was about transmission from one generation to the next of something between a tale and also history itself.
So thank you so much, Elisa, for being part of the Art Destinations. It was such a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this conversation with Elisa Giardina Papa. Be reminded about the next episode of Art Destination Sicily by subscribing to our fortnightly newsletter on our website artdestinations.org. I am your host, Sarah Rhodes. Ciao for now.